Hey everyone, throwaway account here because this is too wild to share with people who know me. I really need to get this off my chest and see if anyone out there has some advice or just wants to commiserate. So it all started at this work party my wife and I attended. Let's call my wife Sarah. Sarah is a bit of a flirt, always has been, but I never thought she'd take it further than that. We've been married for 6 years, no kids, and up until recently, I thought things were going great. The party was at this fancy hotel, the kind with chandeliers and too many forks at dinner. Everyone was having a good time, drinks were flowing, and the music was just loud enough to cover up awkward conversations, but not so loud that you couldn't hear the latest office gossip. I was mingling with my coworkers, making small talk about projects and deadlines. When my boss, Mr. Anderson, a guy who's always been a bit too friendly with Sarah, came up to me. He had this smug look on his face, the kind that makes you want to punch someone. Out of nowhere, he leans in and says, "Tomorrow your wife will go on holiday with me or you will be fired." Just like that. No preamble, no explanation, just a straight-up ultimatum. I was stunned, my brain scrambling to make sense of what he just said. Before I could even react, Sarah, who was standing nearby, pipes up with, "I agree." I couldn't believe it. The woman I married, the one who promised to love and honor me, was agreeing to go on holiday with my boss just like that. Feeling a mixture of betrayal and rage, I stormed out of the room. I needed to cool off, to think, to figure out what the hell just happened. After a few minutes of pacing around outside, I realized I needed to confront them. I headed back into the party, and by then I had something in my hands that would silence everyone. I'm not proud of what I did next, but at that moment I didn't care about pride. I cared about making sure everyone knew just how messed up this situation was. When I returned, the party was still in full swing. Sarah was laughing, holding a drink, completely unbothered by the chaos she'd just helped create. Mr. Anderson was chatting with some colleagues, acting like he hadn't just dropped a bombshell on my life. I walked straight up to him, grabbed a glass of wine from a passing waiter, and threw it right in his face. The room went dead silent. Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Mr. Anderson looked like a drowned rat, wine dripping from his hair and onto his suit. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see what would happen next. "This is what you want?" I shouted at Sarah. "You're really going to go on holiday with this asshole?" She didn't say anything, just looked at me with this strange mix of guilt and defiance. I turned to the crowd and said, "I hope you all see what kind of people you're working with." With that, I left the party for good, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and despair. What was supposed to be a fun night out had turned into the beginning of my worst nightmare. Little did I know this was just the start of the twisted and unexpected events that would follow. I spent that night tossing and turning, replaying the events over and over in my mind. My anger simmered into a cold resolve. By morning, I knew I needed answers. Sarah was still asleep when I finally got out of bed. I went to the kitchen, made myself a strong cup of coffee, and sat at the table waiting for her to wake up. When she finally came downstairs, she looked at me with those big blue eyes that used to melt my heart. But now they just reminded me of her betrayal. She sat down across from me, looking a bit sheepish, but not nearly as remorseful as I'd hoped. "So are you really going to go on holiday with him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah sighed like this was some minor inconvenience and not a massive betrayal. "Look, I know it sounds bad, but it's not what you think, not what I think. You agreed to go away with my boss. How am I supposed to take that?" My voice was rising, but I couldn't help it. "Mr. Anderson, he's been offering me these opportunities for months. Promotions, bonuses, you name it. I've been turning him down, but last night he pushed too far and I didn't know what to say. I didn't mean to agree. It just came out," she explained, her voice shaking a bit. "And you didn't think to discuss this with me, to warn me? You just stood there and agreed to whatever he wanted?" I was furious, but more than that, I was hurt. Sarah reached across the table, trying to take my hand, but I pulled back. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do. I panicked." Her apology didn't do much to ease my pain, but at least it was a start. "You have to tell him you're not going," I said firmly. "We'll deal with whatever comes after that together." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Okay, I'll tell him. But you have to understand, this might mean you lose your job." I'd been with the company for years, and the thought of losing my job was terrifying. But I couldn't let this man have control over my wife. We'll figure something out, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. That day, Sarah called Mr. Anderson and told him she couldn't go on the holiday. She tried to sound professional, but I could hear the fear in her voice. When she hung up, she turned to me. He said he'd think about what to do next. Great, I muttered, not feeling reassured at all. Now we wait. Little did I know that was just the beginning of Mr. Anderson's manipulation. Part 3, the setup. The following week at work was hell. Mr. Anderson didn't fire me, but he made my life miserable. He loaded me up with impossible tasks, scheduled meetings during my lunch breaks, and even gave me the worst projects. It was clear he was punishing me, but there was nothing I could do about it. If I complained, it would just look like I couldn't handle the job. Meanwhile, things at home were tense. Sarah was trying to make up for her mistake, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. She was constantly texting and calling me, checking in to see how I was doing, but it only reminded me of how we got into this mess. One evening, after another grueling day at work, I came home to find Sarah dressed up. She had made a nice dinner, complete with candles and wine. "I thought we could use a nice night together," she said, smiling nervously. I appreciated the effort, but I couldn't fully enjoy it. We ate in silence for a while before she finally spoke up. "I talked to Mr. Anderson again today. My heart sank." "What did he say?" "He said he's willing to forget the whole thing if I meet him for dinner, just dinner, nothing more." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "And you believe him, after everything?" Sarah looked down her eyes, filling with tears. "I don't know what else to do. He holds all the cards. I was furious. So you're just going to go along with it? Again?" She reached out and grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Please, just trust me. I'll make sure nothing happens. I just want to fix this." I wanted to trust her, but it was hard. "Fine," I said finally. "But if he tries anything, you walk out. Got it?" She nodded, relief flooding her face. "I promise." The next day, Sarah went to dinner with Mr. Anderson. I spent the evening pacing around our house, unable to relax. I hated the idea of her being alone with him, but what choice did we have? When she came home, she looked shaken but unharmed. "He kept his word," she said quietly. "It was just dinner. He said he'd back off now." I wanted to believe her, but something in her eyes told me this wasn't over. And I was right. This was just the calm before the storm. The following week at work was hell. Mr. Anderson didn't fire me, but he made my life miserable. He loaded me up with impossible tasks, scheduled meetings during my lunch breaks, and even gave me the worst projects. It was clear he was punishing me, but there was nothing I could do about it. If I complained, it would just look like I couldn't handle the job. Meanwhile, things at home were tense. Sarah was trying to make up for her mistake, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. She was constantly texting and calling me, checking in to see how I was doing, but it only reminded me of how we got into this mess. One evening, after another grueling day at work, I came home to find Sarah dressed up. She had made a nice dinner, complete with candles and wine. "I thought we could use a nice night together," she said, smiling nervously. I appreciated the effort, but I couldn't fully enjoy it. We ate in silence for a while before she finally spoke up. "I talked to Mr. Anderson again today. My heart sank." "What did he say?" "He said he's willing to forget the whole thing if I meet him for dinner. Just dinner, nothing more." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "And you believe him after everything?" Sarah looked down her eyes, filling with tears. "I don't know what else to do. He holds all the cards. I was furious. So you're just going to go along with it? Again?" She reached out and grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Please, just trust me. I'll make sure nothing happens. I just want to fix this." I wanted to trust her, but it was hard. "Fine," I said finally. "But if he tries anything, you walk out. Got it?" She nodded, relief flooding her face. "I promise." The next day, Sarah went to dinner with Mr. Anderson. I spent the evening pacing around our house, unable to relax. I hated the idea of her being alone with him, but what choice did we have? When she came home, she looked shaken but unharmed. "He kept his word," she said quietly. "It was just dinner. He said he'd back off now." I wanted to believe her, but something in her eyes told me this wasn't over. And I was right. This was just the calm before the storm. Life started to regain some semblance of normalcy after that dinner. Mr. Anderson stopped making my work life a living hell. and Sarah seemed to relax a bit. But there was this lingering tension between us that we couldn't shake. I wanted to trust her, to believe that things were getting better, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few weeks later, I came home early from work feeling drained, but relieved that the day was finally over. As I walked into the house, I heard Sarah talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was low and she sounded agitated. Curious, I crept closer to hear what she was saying. "I told you, I can't keep doing this." "He's starting to suspect something," she whispered. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized she was talking to Mr. Anderson. She must have heard me come in because she abruptly ended the call. She turned to face me, her face pale and eyes wide. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nobody," she said quickly, too quickly. I took a step closer, my anger rising. "Don't lie to me, Sarah, I heard you." She bit her lip, tears welling up in her eyes. "It was Mr. Anderson," she admitted. "He's been calling me, trying to get me to meet him again." My heart sank. "And you didn't think to tell me? I didn't want to worry you," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I could handle it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Handle it? By lying to me?" She reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing with thoughts of betrayal and anger. "This has to stop," I said finally. "You need to tell him that you're done. No more meetings, no more calls." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will, I promise." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Why didn't you come to me sooner? Why let it get to this point?" Sarah looked down, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. "I was scared. I didn't want to lose you, and I didn't know how to make it stop. He kept pressuring me, and I thought I could handle it on my own." I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was drowned out by my anger and hurt. "You should have trusted me," I said, my voice softer now. "We're supposed to be in this together." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I'm so sorry. I'll fix this. I promise." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The damage had been done, and I wasn't sure if we could ever come back from this. That night we went to bed in silence, the distance between us feeling like a chasm that might never be bridged. The next morning I woke up early, unable to sleep. I found Sarah already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring into space. She looked up when I entered the room, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "I called Mr. Anderson," she said quietly. "I told him it was over, that he needed to stop contacting me." "What did he say?" I asked, bracing myself for the worst. "He wasn't happy," she admitted. "He said I was making a mistake, that I'd regret it. But I told him I'm done." I blocked his number. I felt a small sense of relief, but it was overshadowed by my lingering doubts. "I hope that's the end of it," I said, sitting down across from her. "But we need to be prepared for whatever comes next." Sarah nodded, reaching across the table to take my hand. "We'll get through this. Together." I squeezed her hand, wanting to believe her words, but deep down I knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. We had a long way to go to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. That night I barely slept. My mind was spinning with everything that had happened. The next day I decided it was time to confront Mr. Anderson directly. I needed to put an end to this once and for all. I waited until the end of the workday when most of the office had cleared out. Then I marched into Mr. Anderson's office, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. He looked up from his desk, a smirk on his face. "What can I do for you, buddy?" he asked, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "I'm not your buddy," I snapped. "This has to stop. You need to leave my wife alone." His smirk faded and he leaned back in his chair, studying me. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said smoothly. "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice rising. "I know you've been calling her, trying to get her to meet you again. It ends now." He shrugged, a condescending smile spreading across his face. "She's a grown woman. If she didn't want to talk to me, she wouldn't." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my anger in check. "This isn't a game. You're messing with our lives." He stood up, walking around his desk to stand in front of me. "And what are you going to do about it? You need this job, remember?" The threat was clear and it made my blood boil, but I knew I couldn't let him push me around anymore. "I'll find another job," I said, my voice steady, "but I won't let you ruin my marriage." He laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "Good luck with that." I left his office feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. I had stood up to him, but I knew it wasn't over. Mr. Anderson wasn't the type to back down easily. When I got home, I told Sarah what had happened. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and hope. "Do you think he'll stop?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we have to be ready for whatever comes next." That evening, we sat down together to come up with a plan. We agreed that Sarah would document every interaction with Mr. Anderson going forward, and we'd start looking for new job opportunities for both of us. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. A few days later, Mr. Anderson called a staff meeting. He announced that he would be taking a leave of absence due to personal reasons. The relief in the room was palpable. I exchanged a glance with Sarah, hoping this was a sign that things were finally going to get better. But just when we thought the worst was behind us, there was a knock on our door one evening. It was Amanda, Mr. Anderson's wife, looking more determined than ever. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Sarah and I exchanged worried glances as we followed her into the living room. "What's going on?" I asked. Amanda sat down, fixing us both with a steely gaze. "I filed for divorce," she said, "and I'm going to make sure he pays for everything he's done." My heart pounded in my chest. "What does that mean for us?" "It means you're not alone," Amanda replied. "I have evidence that could help you, but we need to work together." Sarah and I listened as Amanda outlined her plan. She had been gathering information on Mr. Anderson for months, and she had enough to expose his misconduct at the company. It was risky, but it was our best shot at ending this nightmare for good. As Amanda left that night, I felt a renewed sense of hope. It wouldn't be easy, but with her help, maybe we could finally put an end to Mr. Anderson's reign of terror. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers gathering evidence and preparing for the battle ahead. Sarah and I grew closer through it all, our shared goal of taking down Mr. Anderson strengthening our bond. Finally, the day came when we presented our case to the company's board of directors. With Amanda's help, we laid out all the evidence of Mr. Anderson's harassment and unethical behavior. It was a tense and nerve-wracking experience, but we stood strong together. In the end, the board decided to terminate Mr. Anderson's employment and launch a full investigation into his actions. It was a huge victory, not just for us, but for everyone who had suffered under his tyranny. As we left the boardroom, Sarah squeezed my hand. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with relief and gratitude. "Yeah," I replied, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. "We really did." The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about our future. With Mr. Anderson out of our lives and a fresh start on the horizon, we could finally begin to heal and rebuild what had been broken. Part 6. The Unexpected Visit. A few days after our victory, just when I thought things were starting to settle down, there was a knock on our door. Sarah and I exchanged a worried glance before I went to answer it. Standing on our doorstep was a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall, with dark hair and a confident demeanor. "Can I help you?" I asked, confused. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Amanda, Mr. Anderson's wife. Can I come in?" My heart skipped a beat. This was the last thing I expected. Sure," I said, stepping aside to let her in. Sarah appeared in the hallway, her eyes widening when she saw Amanda. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Amanda walked into our living room and sat down on the couch, looking around like she was assessing the place. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice calm but firm. I sat down across from her, my mind racing. "About what?" She looked directly at Sarah. "About your affair with my husband." The room went silent. Sarah's face turned pale and she looked like she might faint. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Don't play dumb. I've seen the texts, the emails. I know everything." My heart sank. This was worse than I thought. "How did you find out?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She sighed, leaning back on the couch. "I've known for a while. I've been tracking his phone, reading his messages. I just needed to see it for myself." Sarah looked like she was about to cry. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Amanda's expression softened slightly. I believe you, but that doesn't change what happened. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. Why didn't you come to us sooner? Amanda looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. I wanted to see if he would come clean on his own, but he didn't. So now I'm here. She turned back to Sarah. You need to cut off all contact with him. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows what happened. Your friends, your family, everyone. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will, I promise. Amanda stood up, smoothing down her dress. Good. And if he contacts you again, you let me know. She handed me a business card with her contact information. We're in this together now, she said, her voice softening. Let's make sure they don't get away with this. After she left, Sarah and I sat in silence, processing everything that had just happened. The unexpected visit had thrown us for a loop, but it also gave us a strange sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this together. But deep down, I knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. A few days after our victory, just when I thought things were starting to settle down, there was a knock on our door. Sarah and I exchanged a worried glance before I went to answer it. Standing on our doorstep was a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall, with dark hair and a confident demeanor. Can I help you? I asked, confused. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm Amanda, Mr. Anderson's wife. Can I come in? My heart skipped a beat. This was the last thing I expected. Sure, I said, stepping aside to let her in. Sarah appeared in the hallway, her eyes widening when she saw Amanda. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice trembling. Amanda walked into our living room and sat down on the couch, looking around like she was assessing the place. I think we need to talk, she said, her voice calm but firm. I sat down across from her, my mind racing. About what? She looked directly at Sarah. About your affair with my husband. The room went silent. Sarah's face turned pale, and she looked like she might faint. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. Amanda raised an eyebrow. Don't play dumb. I've seen the texts, the emails. I know everything. My heart sank. This was worse than I thought. How did you find out? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She sighed, leaning back on the couch. I've known for a while. I've been tracking his phone, reading his messages. I just needed to see it for myself. Sarah looked like she was about to cry. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Amanda's expressions softened slightly. I believe you. But that doesn't change what happened. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. Why didn't you come to us sooner? Amanda looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. I wanted to see if he would come clean on his own, but he didn't. So now I'm here. She turned back to Sarah. You need to cut off all contact with him. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows what happened. Your friends, your family, everyone. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will. I promise. Amanda stood up, smoothing down her dress. Good. And if he contacts you again, you let me know. She handed me a business card with her contact information. We're in this together now, she said, her voice softening. Let's make sure they don't get away with this. After she left, Sarah and I sat in silence, processing everything that had just happened. The unexpected visit had thrown us for a loop, but it also gave us a strange sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this together. But deep down, I knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. The next few days were tense, to say the least. Sarah and I were walking on eggshells, trying to rebuild trust while keeping an eye on any further moves from Mr. Anderson. I was still wary of him, but I had to admit that Amanda's visit had given me a sliver of hope. Then, one evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? Hey, buddy. Mr. Anderson's oily voice greeted me. I think we need to talk. My stomach churned. There's nothing to talk about, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, I think there is, he said smoothly. Meet me at the bar on 5th Street in an hour. We can settle this like men. I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to. I told Sarah about the call, and she looked at me with wide eyes. Do you think it's a trap? She asked. Probably, I admitted, but we can't avoid this forever. If I don't show up, he'll just keep finding ways to get to us." She nodded reluctantly. "Be careful." The bar on 5th Street was dimly lit and almost empty when I arrived. Mr. Anderson was sitting at a table in the back nursing a drink. He looked up and smiled as I approached, gesturing for me to sit. "Glad you could make it," he said, his tone mocking. "Get to the point," I snapped, refusing to sit down. He took a slow sip of his drink, clearly enjoying my discomfort. "All right, here's the deal. You walk away from your job quietly, and I won't make your life any more miserable than it already is. In return, I'll leave Sarah alone." I felt a surge of anger. "You think you can just buy us off? After everything you've done?" He shrugged. "I'm offering you a way out. Take it or leave it." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my temper in check. "And what's stopping me from going to the board with everything I know?" He leaned forward, his smile fading. "Because if you do, I'll make sure Sarah's reputation is ruined. I have enough dirt on her to make sure she never works again. Do you really want to do that to her?" My heart pounded in my chest. He had me cornered, and he knew it. "You're a bastard," I said through gritted teeth. He smirked. "Maybe, but I'm a bastard with power. So what's it going to be?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I turned and walked out of the bar, feeling his eyes on my back the whole time. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me, her face pale with worry. "What happened?" she asked. I sat down, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. "He wants me to quit my job quietly. If I do, he'll leave us alone. If I don't, he's threatening to ruin your reputation." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "What are we going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling utterly defeated. "But we'll figure something out. We have to." That night, we stayed up late discussing our options. Quitting my job felt like giving in to his bullying, but the alternative was risking Sarah's career and our future. It was a no-win situation, and it felt like the walls were closing in on us. In the end, we decided to reach out to Amanda. She had offered her help before, and we needed all the allies we could get. The next morning, I sent her a message explaining the situation and asking for her advice. Her response came quickly. "Meet me at my lawyer's office tomorrow. We'll discuss our next move." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. And with Amanda's help, maybe we could find a way to turn the tables on Mr. Anderson once and for all. The next day, Sarah and I went to Amanda's lawyer's office. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, but there was a sense of determination as well. Amanda greeted us with a firm handshake and introduced us to her lawyer, Mr. Collins, a sharp-looking man with an air of confidence. "Thank you for coming," Amanda said, ushering us into the conference room. "Mr. Collins has been working on a plan to deal with Mr. Anderson." We sat down, and Mr. Collins laid out a series of documents. "We need to gather as much evidence as possible," he began. "Emails, messages, anything that can prove Mr. Anderson's misconduct and harassment." Sarah nodded. "I've been saving everything. I have texts, voicemails, and even some emails." "That's a good start," Mr. Collins said, looking pleased. "We'll compile everything and present a solid case to the company's board of directors. Our goal is to not only protect your jobs, but to ensure that Mr. Anderson is held accountable for his actions." I felt a glimmer of hope. What about his threats to ruin Sarah's reputation? Amanda leaned forward, her expressions serious. "We'll address that too. If he tries to retaliate, we'll be ready. I have my own set of evidence against him, and we can use it to counter any moves he makes." For the first time in weeks, I felt like we had a fighting chance. "What do we need to do?" "Keep documenting everything," Mr. Collins instructed. "If he contacts you, if he makes any more threats, save it all. We need to build an airtight case." Sarah and I agreed, feeling a renewed sense of determination. We spent the next few days gathering all the evidence we had, meticulously organizing it, and preparing for the battle ahead. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but we knew it was necessary. A week later, we had a follow-up meeting with Amanda and Mr. Collins. The pile of evidence had grown significantly, and Mr. Collins seemed confident. "This is good," he said, flipping through the documents. "We have a strong case here." Amanda nodded. "We're ready to present this to the board. They need to know what kind of person Mr. Anderson really is." The day of the board meeting arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. Sarah squeezed my hand as we walked into the conference room, filled with the company's top executives. Amanda and Mr. Collins were already there, looking calm and collected. Mr. Collins began the presentation, laying out all the evidence we had gathered. He detailed Mr. Anderson's harassment, his unethical behavior, and the threats he had made. Sarah and I shared our personal experiences, adding weight to the case. As we spoke, I could see the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to concern. They asked questions, reviewed the evidence, and conferred among themselves. Finally, the chairman spoke. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will conduct a thorough investigation into Mr. Anderson's conduct. Rest assured, we take these allegations very seriously." Relief washed over me, but I knew this was just the beginning. The board's investigation would take time, and we still had to be vigilant. As we left the meeting, Amanda pulled us aside. "You did great in there," she said with a reassuring smile. "Now we wait and see what they find, but I have a feeling things are going to change." Over the next few weeks, the company conducted its investigation. Mr. Anderson was placed on administrative leave, and there was a noticeable shift in the office atmosphere. People whispered in hallways, and the tension was palpable. One afternoon, I received a call from Mr. Collins. "They've reached a decision. The board wants to meet with you and Sarah tomorrow." My heart raced as I relayed the message to Sarah. "This is it," I said. "Let's hope for the best." The following day, we walked into the boardroom with a mix of anxiety and hope. The chairman greeted us and got straight to the point. "After a thorough investigation, we have found sufficient evidence of Mr. Anderson's misconduct. Effective immediately, he has been terminated from his position." A wave of relief and vindication washed over me. Sarah squeezed my hand, tears of gratitude in her eyes. "We also want to assure you that your jobs are secure." The chairman continued. "We apologize for the distress this has caused you, and we will be implementing new policies to prevent this from happening again." As we left the boardroom, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The nightmare was finally over. Sarah and I embraced, feeling closer than we had in months. Amanda and Mr. Collins met us outside, their faces lit up with smiles. "You did it," Amanda said, hugging us both. "We did it." It wasn't just a victory for us, but for everyone who had been bullied and harassed by Mr. Anderson. We had stood up to him and won, and it felt damn good. As we walked away from the building, I knew there were still challenges ahead, rebuilding trust with Sarah, moving forward with our lives, but we had faced the worst and come out stronger, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about our future. We had overcome the odds, and together we could handle anything life threw our way. With Mr. Anderson out of our lives, things slowly began to return to normal. The dark cloud that had been hanging over us for so long was finally lifting. Sarah and I were determined to rebuild our relationship, but we knew it would take time and effort. We started by setting aside time each day to talk, really talk. Not just about our jobs or what we needed from the grocery store, but about our feelings, our fears, and our hopes for the future. It was awkward at first, but gradually it became easier. We were learning how to communicate again. One evening, a few weeks after the board's decision, Sarah and I were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. It was a quiet moment, filled with the kind of peace we hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, breaking the silence, "for everything. For not trusting you enough to tell you what was happening, for letting it get so far." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "I know," I replied, "and I'm sorry for not being more attentive, for not noticing that something was wrong." She reached out and took my hand. "I want to make this work. I want to be better for both of us." I squeezed her hand, feeling a renewed sense of hope. "We will. We'll get through this together." To help rebuild our trust, we started seeing a marriage counselor. It was hard at first, confronting our issues and laying bare our insecurities, but it was also incredibly healing. The counselor gave us tools to communicate more effectively and helped us navigate the complex emotions we were both feeling. We also made a conscious effort to spend more quality time together. We planned date nights, took weekend trips, and even started a new hobby, cooking classes. It was something we could do together, something that required teamwork and patience, and it brought us closer. One night, after a particularly fun cooking class where we'd attempted and hilariously failed to make soufflés, we sat on the couch laughing about our culinary disaster. "I'm really glad we're doing this," Sarah said, snuggling up to me. "It feels like we're getting back to who we used to be." "Me too," I agreed, wrapping my arm around her. It feels good to laugh again. Our journey to rebuild trust wasn't without its setbacks. There were still moments of doubt and insecurity, but we faced them head-on together. Whenever old fears resurfaced, we talked about them openly, refusing to let them fester. One evening, as we were preparing dinner, Sarah suddenly said, "Do you think we could ever fully move past this?" I paused, considering her question. "I think we already are," I replied. "Every day that we choose to trust each other, to be open and honest, we're moving past it. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about learning from it and becoming stronger because of it." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I love you. I love you too," I said, pulling her into a hug. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real and growing stronger every day. The experience had taught us both valuable lessons about trust, communication, and resilience. We were committed to making our marriage work, and that commitment made all the difference. As we moved forward, we continued to set new goals and dreams for our future. We talked about traveling more, maybe even starting a family someday. The possibilities felt endless, and for the first time in a long while, they felt achievable. One sunny afternoon, as we were walking in the park, Sarah turned to me and said, "Thank you for not giving up on us." I looked at her, feeling a surge of love and gratitude. "Thank you for fighting for us. We're a team, and together we can handle anything." Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and together we were creating a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future. Months passed, and the scars from our ordeal began to heal. Sarah and I had worked hard to rebuild our relationship, and it was paying off. We had grown stronger, closer, and more committed to each other than ever before. It felt like we had come through the fire and emerged as something new, something unbreakable. One Saturday morning, as we were enjoying a leisurely breakfast, Sarah looked at me with a mischievous smile. "I have a surprise for you," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what is it?" She reached under the table and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to me with a grin. I opened it, revealing 2 plane tickets to Italy. "I thought we could use a vacation," she said. "A real one, just the 2 of us." I was stunned. "Italy? Are you serious?" "Absolutely," she replied, her eyes sparkling. "We deserve it." A wave of excitement washed over me. "This is amazing. Thank you, Sarah." A few weeks later, we found ourselves in the picturesque streets of Rome, hand in hand exploring the ancient city. It was everything we had dreamed of and more. We visited the Colosseum, tossed coins into the Trevi Fountain, and indulged in delicious Italian cuisine. One evening, as we watched the sunset from a cozy cafe overlooking the city, Sarah turned to me with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about our future." "What about it?" I asked, taking her hand. "I want to start a family," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I want to build a life with you, filled with love and happiness." My heart swelled with emotion. "I want that too," I said, squeezing her hand. "More than anything." Returning home from Italy, we felt rejuvenated and ready to face whatever the future held. We continued our counseling sessions, determined to keep our communications strong and our relationship healthy. We also started making plans for our future, discussing everything from buying a new house to starting a family. One evening, as we were packing up our belongings to move into our new home, Sarah found an old photo album. We sat on the floor, flipping through the pages, reminiscing about our journey together. There were pictures from our wedding, vacations, and countless happy moments. "We've been through so much," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. "But we made it." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude, and we'll keep making it no matter what. Moving into our new home felt like a fresh start. We painted the walls, decorated each room with love, and made it our own. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of our resilience and commitment to each other. One afternoon, as we were unpacking the last of the boxes, Sarah looked at me with a radiant smile. "I have something to tell you." "What is it?" I asked, curiosity piqued. She took a deep breath, her eyes shining with joy. "I'm pregnant." For a moment I was speechless, overwhelmed with happiness. Then I pulled her into my arms, tears of joy streaming down my face. "This is incredible," I whispered. "I love you so much." "I love you too," she replied, hugging me tightly. The months that followed were filled with anticipation and excitement. We attended doctor's appointments, decorated the nursery, and dreamed about the future. Our journey had been filled with challenges, but it had also led us to this beautiful moment. On a crisp autumn morning, our baby girl was born. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt an indescribable sense of love and completeness. Sarah and I had come full circle, from the brink of losing everything to building a life filled with love and hope. As we sat in the hospital room, marveling at our newborn daughter, I knew that we had truly embarked on a new beginning. Our past struggles had only made us stronger, and our future was bright with possibilities. Life had tested us, but we had emerged victorious. Together we had faced our fears, rebuilt our trust, and created a beautiful new chapter in our story. And as we looked at our baby girl, we knew that the best was yet to come.